We'll now be joined by Gary Murphy, Chanté Mouton Kinyon and Ruán Magan for a panel conversation. To introduce Gary, he is Professor of Politics at the School of Law and Government and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. He has published extensively on politics and modern Ireland and appears regularly in Irish print and broadcast media. He writes a weekly column for the Irish edition of the Sunday Times. Chanté Mouton Kinyon is Assistant Professor of English at the University of Notre Dame. She's a scholar of transatlanticism and race. Chanté's primary research explores transnational Black American literature and culture with a particular interest in the way it intersects with Irish culture. And Ruán Magan, who is no stranger now, director and producer of drama and documentaries, whose work has reached audiences of millions throughout the US, Europe, Africa, India, and China, and Ireland. Notable projects include the Irish language feature film Boicha, the comedy drama series Wrecking the Rising, and documentaries including Our Blue World and the Irish Civil War, 100 Years of Ulysses, and now Daniel O'Connell, the Emancipator. Please welcome our three panelists to the stage.
Thanks very much, everybody, and it's a great privilege and honor for me to be here with Ruán, who we have I've spent some time with before in the Irish Civil War project, and who is, let's face it, a bit of a genius, really. So it's great to be on stage with him, and I mean, it's just extraordinary what we've just watched. And Chanté Mouton Kinyon, who I've known for years from Notre Dame, and whose work I've admired for a very long time. And we also have Declan Cosgrove and Kevin Whelan in the audience, so we're well set with people who have contributed to the wonderful show we saw tonight. So, Ruán, I'm going to go and ask you the first question. So you say Kevin Whelan, and you had a cup of coffee, and he's a very persuasive man, as we know, but there must be lots of people who come to you with ideas about a documentary on this person or that person or this idea. So why O'Connell and why now?
Hello, there we go. I'll do my do. Yes, that works. I think I'm going to start by answering a question somebody else asked me earlier this evening.
I'm used to being ignored, so go ahead.
Which was what was my connection to 1916? So I've got a grandmother who was quite involved in the War of Independence. Her name was Sheila Humphreys, and her uncle was a fellow called Michael O'Reilly. He was the O'Reilly, and he was among the founders of the Irish Volunteers. He was the most senior officer to die on the rebel side during the 1916 rebellion. And we were brought up with all of this, very much so, myself, my two brothers and my sister, by our grandmother, who lived to a great old age. And so she very much indoctrinated us into the spirit of militant nationalism, let's just call it what it was. And when I began, the first one of these series of history documentaries I made was a three-part series, which was a Notre Dame project called 1916. And it was an extraordinary privilege to become involved. Pat Collins was another director on that project. But it was you could actually perhaps say it kind of a jingoistic telling of the story of 1916, which we needed in 2016. And then time has continued, and after that we made the War of Independence, which Cillian Murphy narrated. Then we made The Hunger, which Liam Neeson narrated. And these are all very strong, big Irish stories about what happened to poor old Ireland, okay? But my mother, who's here, who's my grandmother's daughter, married a man called Colm Mac Con, who was my father. And Michael was not of the militant nationalist persuasion or any bit of it. He was more what you would call a Redmondite. And I remember Dad very clearly, and I remember his politics, and it was only later in life I began to come to grips with this. So several of his uncles died during the First World War. One of his aunts was out as a nurse during the First World War. You know, these are stories we're not allowed to tell, but once I got to do a documentary with Gay Byrne looking at his father's story, I got into that. And this started to awaken me these ideas about, hold on, is there a whole other side of our story that we just haven't been told sufficient, haven't been allowed sufficient access to? I got to make a documentary with Frank Callan about Ulysses and Joyce. And Frank's thesis was that Joyce was a nationalist, And that took me a while to get my head around because he was depicted as a traitor. But of course he was absolutely a nationalist. And the same is true of Parnell, and the same is true of Redmond, and the same is true of O'Connell. So when Kevin asked me, was I be interested in doing O'Connell, I'm going, are you kidding me? This is a whole area that I'm just fascinated with. You know, like what makes O'Connell less of a nationalist than the O'Reilly or Pearce or these people? They're just different forms, but all of them, I think, contributed together to create this country that we have. And the more I got to know about O'Connell, the more I feel that none of what happened afterwards, subsequently during the Irish Revival and then the nationalist movement that brought us the independence eventually, could have happened without O'Connell laying the foundations that he did during those first 5 decades of the 1800s. Sin Mifragra.
Well, follow that, Chanté. So I'll come to you now as looking what we saw tonight. I was very struck by the theme of O'Connell as the sort of the internationalist, the man whose ideas spread, as Colm Barr said, from Bavaria to the Italian states, to the West, to the United States. As a scholar of sort of human rights and one who's made a name for yourself in that field, what lessons can you tell the audience about O'Connell? What does he mean to you?
I think it's interesting to think about O'Connell and his ideas spreading in terms of he believed that all people are created equal. And so this idea inspires others around the world, especially in America and for Black Americans. And it's interesting how that impacts the world and how it stays with each of us. You know, it's hard to imagine a world, I think, for people to imagine a world where you just can't do what you want to do, right? We're so used to this idea that we can be who we want to be, especially now, that we can do what we want to do, that we want to think that we want to think, but previously there is this sense that you don't have the right to and free access to be the person you want to be, to enter society. And O'Connell's ideas, especially in Black America, influenced these thinkers in saying, there's a different way, this pacifist way, this way without violence and without revolution, or revolutionary violence, a revolution of thought. And that's what stays with us today. That's how he lives within each of us, the idea of thought and of this humanity that's available to each of us.
And so what are the lessons then that we can draw from that? Or are there any lessons? Because we live in an age of disinformation, we might say, and certainly we live in an age of disquiet. And listening to Emer in her eloquent introduction to the show an hour or so ago, where she talked about the themes of social justice and human solidarity. I mean, one could argue we don't live in a world of social justice, and we don't live in a world of human solidarity either, where we have people pitted against each other for all sorts of reasons.
I was watching the documentary and I kept thinking about non-violent revolutionary action. And it stays with you and you want it to be able to be successful. But it's also quite challenging because one of the things that I think the film underscores is the threat. There's this threat of violence that's possible. This threat of violence that could, the organization of people, even if the people have no intention of being violent, the idea that the people could come together and that they can challenge the establishment. And I think that's what stays with us today.
Great. Ruán, back to you. Making a documentary like this must be, like you talked about the funding, but there must be extraordinary challenges in terms of, and I think the audience would be interested in this, in terms of time. I mean, you've told an amazing story in 50 minutes, and I mean, Steve Carson is here, he might give you like 2 hours and 50 minutes maybe for the next one. But what are the challenges in terms of fitting so much into such a short time frame, really?
Yeah, it could definitely have managed to fill, easily 2 hours without a doubt. There's a couple of things. So we've been doing this for quite a while. So there is a team, right? And each of the members of the team that I mentioned earlier, or someone like Eric Dolan, who's the graphics guy, has worked on every one of these documentaries. And he just does these extraordinary maps. And we build them together. I spec them, I tell the story. And he then designs these beautifully intricate maps. But two of them stood out to me there as kind of encapsulating what the documentary is about. The first one is the one of the Age of Revolutions. So you see all the revolutions that happened, violent revolutions that happened in Europe between the late 1700s and the mid 1800s in an 8-second map. And just to see how many people are fighting for the reasons that Chanté has just spoken about, but using violence to do so. They're trying to overthrow the status quo, overthrow the system. And the other map then that strikes me is the one of the monster meetings, which is what O'Connell managed to lead the Irish. But you've got to understand, I know you understand this very well, Gary, is that it's not O'Connell. We keep saying O'Connell. This is a movement. These are people in every parish who are doing this. These are the Irish people who are organizing to come and not have weapons, not have sticks, not overthrow anything, despite the fact that throughout Europe at that time, the example is use militant methods. And he's managed, oh my God, I want to ask you now, Gary, a question. Why do you think the monster meeting petered out, that movement? Like, was there something left there that could have been continued?
Well, I think Declan said it very eloquently in the documentary about the Irish being sort of leaderless, and then he became that leader. But if you don't have sort of immediate success, or and Catholic emancipation, and you talked earlier about the independence struggle. I mean, we don't get independence for another century, and even if you go into the 1840s and famine hits. But my feeling on political leadership, and which I've spent a lot of time, perhaps too much time, thinking about Irish Taoiseach, is that if you don't have immediate success, people can just move on and think about things differently. And it's the same in the United States. I was very struck when Chanté, you talked about all men being created equal. If you look at Lincoln, and who was a great admirer of O'Connell, but when Lincoln is shot dead in 1865, there's an enormous leadership vacuum, and what happens? Reconstruction collapses, and civil rights and emancipation is put back for a full century until the 1960s.
Yeah, but again,
does that make sense? That's how
I think again, going back to the documentary and thinking about that twig moment that Kevin speaks of, and the leaderlessness that Declan references. If you don't have someone to lead you and to guide you and to help the people who are really the force behind the movement, to say that we can do this and we must do it together, it's hard to keep going. It's hard to keep moving forward because there's an immediacy with violence. There's a sort of feeling, a sort of gratification that you have succeeded in something, and that these violent acts and these violent revolutions, that feeling of overthrowing, it gives you that sense that I've accomplished something. At least this is accomplished. At least those people are dead. At least they know that I am serious about my words. And so, but with the leader, the people have a way of being encouraged, and you don't see yourself like kind of backing off. You keep going and you keep moving forward because you're in it together. And then when the leader is removed, it's kind of hard to see yourself as that stick of branches.
Yeah, that's a very good point, I think. And if we just shoot back to one of your previous works, Ruán, which was on the Irish Civil War, and like one of the great, Kevin, I think in the documentary mentioned about De Valera, and I think most people would accept that his darkest or maybe worst hour is the lack of leadership during the Civil War, which then descends into chaos. And maybe his great triumph is then to stabilize the state when he accepts the treaty and all that stuff towards the end of the 1920s. And, I quite admire De Valera in many ways, although I did go to a house once with a friend of mine when we were trying to rent in Dublin, and we saw a picture of De Valera on the wall, and he says, I don't care if the rent is free, I'm not living here. So I said, well, if it's free, maybe. But my point being that I think the Civil War is a period where there's a lack of leadership, And what the greatness of O'Connell in one way is that he offers leadership, although it peters out, for peaceful struggle.
And that's funny. One of the things that really strikes me about O'Connell is he keeps going. Like we tried to say it there with the dates and with the age. He keeps getting older and older. But he's at this for 45 years, like every week. I mean that's the amount of dedication that is. This is what a leader is. This is what someone who's lending. And for all the criticism that he's banked and a lot of it quite justified, you've got to give him that. Like 45 years of dedication to the Irish cause, to raise a people up from the ground and give them courage and give them succour and to define what Irishness is. There's a lovely thing which we had to cut out, but one of them is that when the colour emerald green was only invented in the 1830s, and he just latched onto it. I'm having emerald green, right? So his hat was emerald green, his flags were emerald green. That's in the 1820s. But he's trying everything. He is trying everything to create this thing. He has a vision for what Ireland can be, free and but of course with home rule. So this is of course what makes him so unpopular for all of our younger American and students from Notre Dame. Is he's an advocate for home rule, which became a very dirty word in Irish history. Because it means that you remain within the British Empire, even though you have right over certain things like taxes and education and things like that. You still remain a member of the British Empire. But who's to say what he would have done later with that? We don't know. Yes.
Yeah, but no, I was just struck listening to you there, Ruán, on the leadership but not to know will the goal ever happen during one's lifetime. And he lives like quite in an age where he's living much longer than average life expectancy. To, what was he, 72? 71, which is much longer, I think, than most Irish people who were born in 1775 could have expected to live. And I'm always struck about leaders, and I mean, very few of them reach the sort of the promised land because there's failure. Would you think, Chanté?
Well, I think, and what we've accentuated here is that there's the sacrifice that is made with a leader who dedicates their life to a cause. You go through the list in the film from his daughter about what his day looks like, and that is a hard life for a person to say, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to move forward. Because you've given your life over to this cause rather than perhaps enjoying your family, enjoying time with your partner, enjoying time with your children. And so I think it's a huge sacrifice. In the US, we often note that the presidents, they start looking quite young, and then 8 years later, they're gray and look really aged and old. And so that type of...
President Obama, who Niamh Gallagher referenced, he had aged quite a lot.
Yeah, he aged quite a bit by the end. And so there's this sense that being in a leadership position, especially when the weight of a nation is on your shoulders, right? When the weight of your people are looking to you for success and for advancement and for survival, that is quite draining. And it's hard to ask for the everyday person. It's interesting also, too, this concept of the penny, right? Because it's something that everyone can do. And so there's the low bar that you want to try to meet, right? You want to try to meet, like, everyone can do this, but not everyone can be a Daniel O'Connell. Not everyone can be a leader of their people.
Yeah, I was very struck watching again. Ruán, you've been able to do this in most of your work. You marry the sort of the genius of O'Connell and the importance of him as a leader, and then you were able to trace it through the lives of ordinary people. We heard Declan talking on the documentary about the hundreds of thousands who travelled the country to go to mass meetings where they knew they couldn't get anywhere near O'Connell or certainly hear anything he would say barefooted. In the Civil War documentary, you tell us what it means for ordinary people on the ground. Is that something you do deliberately, but I think it just adds so much strength to your work?
Well, I mean, I get very excited by the idea of who we are. It's funnily, I have a friend who says you just keep making the same documentary over and over again. And sometimes I make them in threes, or sometimes I make them in twos. And it's true. There's a thing. Okay, there's a thing that motivates me. I don't know what I'm at about this, but I'll say what motivates me is I'm trying to find out, like, what is it that makes us tick? What makes the Irish tick? Now, why do I ask that question? I've had a great privilege of traveling the world a lot. I've been to a lot of different places. And everywhere you go, you meet people who go, you're Irish, suddenly everything's changed, right? So, but they haven't met many Irish, but there's just something that, so I'm trying to go, well, what is that? You can't answer it. It's impossible for us to answer. But I just keep feeling if I keep telling the story of what happened in the last 50, 100 years, 200 years, 300, we might scrape off a little bit of that thing. The other thing on the same subject is that these documentaries travel. People love to watch them. So, The Hunger is still showing around the world. This is a documentary made about the famine. The Steps of Freedom is still showing around the world. I think it's been seen by about 60 million people. The Irish Revolution's still travels around. Like people just love the story of the plucky little Irish who sort of try and do this thing, right? So that's it. It's kind of trying to scrape at something which I know I'll never ever get to.
Yeah, but you have these enduring themes, and you just touched on this, Chanté. The idea of the leader not seeing his or her children, and then having regrets decades later. I've spoken to children of former Taoiseach who say, "Oh, I never saw him," and that was it. And they kind of get used to it, but I think deep down a lot of them kind of scarred by it, and the work ethic, certainly. Emer is going to give me dagger eyes. I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes to finish up. But I just wanted to touch on just one or two other things. What's your sort of abiding memory of being interviewed, Chanté, by this person? I think people, talking heads on documentaries, sometimes there's too many of them, sometimes there's not enough of them. You always have the great trick of getting people who actually know what they're talking about, which I don't think every director has. What's it like being interviewed? You? Yeah.
Ruán, you made me feel comfortable. I think I was quite nervous. I was like, why are you asking me these questions? I don't know. And you were like, no, you do know, actually. You do have this information. And you made me feel welcome, and we did. It was like we were sitting down and having a chat. It's a wonderful opportunity to get to talk about something that I'm invested in and that I believe in, especially in the meeting, which I know that got cut. We didn't get cut, but we talked a lot about Frederick Douglass meeting Daniel O'Connell, and it's such an important moment in terms of, I write about the connections and these interactions between Irish and Black history, and that moment is so huge. And so to get a chance to talk about it and say, like, other people are interested in it, and to, like, in some ways to be moved by that, I really appreciate that, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the film.
And Ruán, for you, what's it like? What's the secret to try and get people to stay on track when they might wander off the point? We had tremendous people. I think that's a great selection you managed. But like Patrick Egan, who's written this big 2-volume biography of O'Connell, is it difficult to get these people to stay on track?
Oh my God, it's
you can give out about him. I don't think he's here. I know him well anyway. I'll text him later.
I didn't mean that to sound like. It's more that what you're talking about, Gary, is such a big part of this. So it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I just trust. And so now I sit into the chair, we have everything ready, lighting is done, camera's done, everything, and hopefully before the person arrives. And I am extremely nervous for the day before it, which is why I thank my wife before it has to put up with me, like, it's good, absolutely up the walls. But the moment it begins is a magical moment. It's absolutely extraordinary. Because if I've completely suppressed my own ego and not worried and I have questions, but I don't and actually never stick to the questions. I just started this conversation. What happens is this flow between us, and it's very, very, very beautiful. And what's going on is that I have just the most extraordinary respect for the amount of work that scholars like Chanté and Kevin and Declan and all of these people have done. They've dedicated their lives to this particular topic that we're talking about. And my only job is to try and create a wave that they can surf. And that's it. And it's become a real joy. I absolutely love it. And then with Patrick, the reason so Patrick is a very busy man, and so he turns up and he's essentially knows everything about O'Connell. He's written 2 great books. He knows the whole deal. So I'm going, well, that's great. We'll get him to that. And he turns to me, looks at me. We've got 90 minutes, and I'm going, oh man. This isn't going to work in 90 minutes. Well, it might work in 90 minutes because 90 minutes is just at the cusp of the amount of time. If you start spending a little bit more than 90 minutes, the interviewee gets bored as well and gets unsettled. So, okay, we'll go for it. But he started every single answer with a big smile, as if it was the first time he'd heard the question, as if he'd no idea I was going to ask that, as if my intellectual prowess was greater than his. And I thought, well, thank you so much, Mr. Gagan. Yeah, amazing job.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, at least I hope we have had some insight into the themes of this extraordinary film we've just watched, and then the idea of how it came to fruition and how it might be made. So I hope everyone got as much out of that as I did. But Emer tells me now I have to stop, so I'm happy to stop, and I think Colm is going to give us some extraordinary music. Is that right? Sorry.
Oh. So we're about to hear some of the soundtrack from the documentary that Colm Mac Con Iomaire wrote. And playing on piano is Declan Cosgrove. Singing will be Muireann Ní Shé, and the song she'll be singing was written at the time of emancipation, and it's written by Daniel O'Connell. It is of the moment, and so will be brought back in history by that. So anyway, in Buinigi Soltas.
So yeah, Gurmil Magav is more agam Venshutliv. It's big with me to be here with you. We will play a Shano song, or the air of a Shano song, followed by one of the cues from the documentary, and then Muireann will sing Donal Bean O'Connell Queen. So starting with the air, which is an air which I've known most of my life because my father's from Connemara, where the song was written, and it's a piece called Johnny Shoige, which is translates as John Joyce or Johnny Joyce. The story goes that Johnny Shoige was working in the poorhouse, and that his job was to allocate or to allow people who were in need into the poorhouse, and also to allocate rations of minwi or Indian corn, as it was, for the starving people. And that the writer of the song was turned away from the poorhouse, and he was refused food. So Irish people are very resourceful, so they use what they have to protest. So he wrote a song about him, and he called it Johnny Shoige, and it's an ear, as they called him in Irish. It's a satire, which is probably what you would fear most from a bard or a poet. And he ridicules Johnny Shoige with faint praise. And but interestingly, through the course of having a look at learning more about this song, I discovered that the song was written by a man called Mícheál Mharcais Mac Con Iomaire from Corna in Connemara. So it was written by an ancestor of mine, which is remarkable. So I'd like to play this for Ruán and for Aisling and Crona and Liadan and Riach in memory of Monaghan. Maggie. So we're blessed with that Muireann Ní Shé is available because the Muireann who sings on the score is actually Muireann Nic Owleave, but Muireann couldn't make it tonight, so Muireann Ní Shé gallantly stood up. Exactly, yeah. So, this song was written by Thomas Ruá O'Sullivan, who was a poet. And the story goes is that after O'Connell's victory, his winning of the Clare election in 1828, that Thomas Ruá composed this poem. I would say it was originally a poem, and said it for O'Connell when O'Connell made it from County Clare in a place called the Top of Coombe, not far from Coolay. So this is where this happened. Donald Bean O'Connell Queen, which is gentle, sweet Daniel O'Connell. So it's the polar opposite of Johnny Shoga.
Sé Donald Bean O'Connell Queen an plan de fear den gael gur le fiause fin is miauer a hin the skol sé sies an chreslo go will sé skrite bastorin go ma verkies an gael smek fargi brak le flite tap is tach haar flinte klere agus right fall de dal right fall de dal right fall dal any verach here tan dragon din archkin near her erin go vak gid go brave kier und hal se hin on neide van is vier din kan faller i sklepe de hallen din ang ragale applause pindorebe agus right fall de dal right fall de dal right fall dal sudden for shall kun sharon port let Laura nu der neve kan streak and stress can flip and sola sport can feste all them loonies boile found go heinem tune den ellen like broga door ga kogartlu like roa the gun darnaik moich agus right fall de dal right fall de dal right fall dal beg ministry gan stress gan flimp snivred kan kin mar hedish ni vunet kieste jatlehi mar curver shies na merle